I'd like to invite Dr. Sunil Taneja, Associate Professor at PGI Chandigarh Department of Hepatology, to talk about NASH after liver transplant and its impact, the impact of immunosuppression and NASH after liver transplant. Sunil, over to you.
Good evening, and thank you, ma'am, for the introduction. And at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Sehgal for giving me this opportunity. Are my slides visible?
Yeah.
Yes, they're very visible.
Yeah. Okay, so my job here is to talk about NASH after liver transplant, and my particular focus will be on the impact of immunosuppression on NASH after transplant. And over the next 15 minutes, I will be discussing about the role of immunosuppression on increasing NASH after transplant, metabolic syndrome after transplant, and how do you diagnose and manage these patients post-transplant. So we all know that NASH is thus becoming the most common indication for liver transplant. And if you look at this data from US, it's the second most common indication for liver transplant right now after alcohol. And by 2030, it's going to be the leading indication for transplant world over. And this is obviously worrisome, and we need to take all measures to control this epidemic of fatty liver disease. So let us look at the metabolic syndrome before and after transplant. And if you look at this area, you have diabetes and hypertension in around 10 to 15% of patients before transplant. Dyslipidemia is seen in around 20%, obesity in around 15 to 40% world over, and metabolic syndrome is usually diagnosed in around 5 to 30% of patients. And this is primarily seen in patients who have NASH as the etiology of liver disease, followed by hepatitis C and alcoholic liver disease. And what happens after transplant, you see it becomes double. In fact, diabetes and hypertension is seen in around 30 to 70% of the patients. Dyslipidemia is seen in around, again, 50 to 70%, and metabolic syndrome is seen in around 60% of the patients. So if you have metabolic syndrome before transplant, after transplant, this risk doubles, and you will have more complications related to metabolic syndrome post-transplant. So why do you really have this metabolic syndrome after transplant? Around 30 to 70% of the patients become obese or overweight after transplant. Obviously, this is because of the reversal of the catabolic state, because pre-transplant, most of the patients are sarcopenic, frail, and subsequent to transplant, they tend to improve. We use a lot of immunosuppression in our patients, and this obviously leads to metabolic syndrome, which I will discuss in my subsequent slides. And obviously, the physician also feels that the patient is gaining weight, and this is a good sign after transplant, and we are not really looking at the complications which they develop post-transplant of the metabolic syndrome. So two definitions which I will be using in my subsequent slides are: one, what is recurrent NASH? Recurrent NASH is recurrence of NAFLD in patients in whom the primary indication for transplant was non-alcoholic fatty liver disease-related cirrhosis. And de novo NAFLD is defined as the occurrence of liver steatosis or steatohepatitis in transplant recipients after transplant for indications other than NAFLD like alcohol and hepatitis C. So another thing which I want to emphasize here is that there are no histological features to differentiate recurrent from de novo NAFLD after transplant. And this distinction is primarily based on identification of the pre-existing metabolic parameters, like presence of diabetes, hypertension, and obesity pre-transplant. So let us look at the incidence and risk factors for NAFLD after transplant. And this is a systematic review and meta-analysis. 17 studies were included in this paper, around 2,300 patients. And in this 15 studies included retrospective analysis of the post-liver transplant liver biopsies. 2 studies used imaging for outcome assessment. Overall, 7 studies evaluated the occurrence of recurrent NAFLD or NASH. 3 evaluated de novo NASH and 7 evaluated both de novo and recurrent NASH. So let us look at the results. Look at the incidence rates. Recurrent NAFLD is seen in around 80% of the patients 5 years down the line. And de novo is also seen in around 78%. But if you look at the difference in recurrence of NASH, at 5 years, recurrent NASH is seen in around 38%, whereas it is 17% in de novo NASH. So obviously, presence of metabolic factors before transplant leads to early recurrence and higher degree of NASH after transplant. So what are the risk factors for post-liver transplant non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? Primarily, it is the metabolic parameters, presence of diabetes, dyslipidemia, and obesity. You can also have genetic predisposition. For example, if you have PNPLA3 GG genotype, you have a higher risk of developing allograft NAFLD or NASH after transplant. Obviously, there is a role of microbiome, which we all know. And then immunosuppression plays a definite role in development of post-transplant metabolic syndrome. And Hep C, alcohol, and NASH are other contributing factors leading to development of NASH or NAFLD post-transplant. So what is the effect of the immunosuppressive medication? Obviously, these all medications have deleterious effect on metabolic parameters. The worst of all is corticosteroids. It can cause obesity, impaired glucose tolerance, dyslipidemia, and hypertension. The CNIs are known to cause impaired glucose tolerance, dyslipidemia, and hypertension, and mTOR inhibitors likely cause dyslipidemia. And how do these medications cause this metabolic derangement? If you look at CNIs, it is primarily because of increased insulin resistance and decreased insulin secretion. They also decrease the bile acid synthesis, which leads to increased risk of dyslipidemia. Both cyclosporine and TAC are diabetogenic, and this happens by increasing the insulin resistance and inhibition of steroid metabolism in a dose-dependent manner. So if you're using higher doses of tacrolimus or CSA, there's a higher risk of development of diabetes. This also causes decreased insulin secretion, which is due to direct beta cell toxicity via vacuolization and degranulation or through inhibition of transcription factors that modulate B cell growth. For example, apoptosis, if you have the secretory dysfunction, you block the GLUT pathway as well as switch over to the type 2 fibers in the muscle, which regulate the gluconeogenesis. And it seems that TAC appears to be more diabetogenic than cyclosporine. And this is a very nice systematic review, which showed that tacrolimus is superior to cyclosporine in terms of hypertension. However, the diabetogenic potential is much higher as compared to cyclosporine. So if you have patients who have a high risk for developing diabetes, it is always better to switch over to cyclosporine. And if the sugars are not getting controlled by this, cyclosporine would be a better drug to be used in such patients. So what are the risk factors for metabolic syndrome after liver transplantation? Whether cyclosporine or tacrolimus cause more of metabolic syndrome after transplant, this is a meta-analysis which showed that cyclosporine is not really associated with increased risk of metabolic syndrome as compared to tacrolimus, except in one study. Overall, there was no difference between tacrolimus or cyclosporine in the occurrence of metabolic syndrome post-transplant. So both of them can cause metabolic transplant post-transplant. None of the drugs fare better in causing metabolic syndrome post-transplant. A word about mTOR inhibitors. mTOR inhibitors are known to cause dyslipidemia, and they lead to elevated levels of triglycerides, LDL cholesterol, total cholesterol, as well as the small density LDL. And this is again because of the decreased bile acid synthesis, and there is increased free fatty acid pool and increased hepatic synthesis of triglycerides. Rapamycin also causes decreased fatty acid oxidation, leading to expansion of this free fatty acid pool. Obviously, these drugs are known to cause dyslipidemia. And let me show you the comparison of CNI with mTOR inhibitors. So if you use CNIs, obviously the risk of dyslipidemia is there, but it is less as compared to the mTOR inhibitors. And all these studies show that the p-value is significant when you use everolimus or sirolimus, and dyslipidemia is more with these drugs as compared to the CNIs which are being used. So let's move on to corticosteroids. We all know that steroids are detrimental and they can cause obesity, induce glucose intolerance, hypertension, and hyperlipidemia. But the good point is that we have started rapidly weaning off steroids, and steroids are off in most of the patients by 3 to 6 months. So the rapid weaning of steroids limits the steroid side effects, and only indication which remains of using steroids is acute cellular rejection, where high dose is used. And this is also short term, and hence the long term effects of steroids are usually not seen now. So what is the impact of early corticosteroid withdrawal on graft survival in liver transplant recipients? This is an elegant paper of 330 patients, which showed that graft survival was significantly lower in the early steroid withdrawal group. And late steroid withdrawal group had a significantly high rate of early acute episodes of rejection. However, there was no difference with regard to new-onset diabetes after transplant, hyperlipidemia, or cardiovascular events between groups. So that means that if you use steroids on long term, they might not be as detrimental as it has been really considered, because most of the time we are just using a small dose of steroids. And just look at this meta-analysis. They studied 7 studies, and that all of these studies reported that long-term use was not a risk factor for metabolic syndrome. And 5 studies were eligible for meta-analysis, which confirmed that the pooled OR of 0.74, suggesting that long-term steroid use in small doses really do not cause metabolic syndrome. So is it important to monitor recurrent or de novo NASH? There are no recommendations as such from any society at present. And there are no recommendations for monitoring of patients who do not have transplant and have NAFLD by other societies also. So there are studies where people have looked at a normal ALT and ultrasound, and if there is no stenosis on ultrasound and you have a normal ALT, there is a high chance that the patient will not develop NASH. So what else can be done to monitor patients with recurrent or de novo NASH? People have used MRI. MR elastography has a very high diagnostic accuracy for detection of advanced fibrosis. There are studies available in post-transplant patients. However, the limited availability of MRI and the high cost precludes its use in general practice. Transient elastography of FibroScan has also been used in non-transplant settings, but there is no established data from adults in liver transplant patients. There is some data from pediatric post-transplant population where it has shown a good sensitivity and specificity and a high positive predictive value and a negative predictive value in detecting allograft fibrosis. So this probably can be used as a modality for diagnosis of steatosis and fibrosis in patients post-transplant. So what are the implications of NASH? If you have recurrent or de novo allograft steatosis after transplant, are there any long-term outcomes? So very nice paper by Narayanan et al. They showed that allograft steatosis was not associated with post liver transplant survival, nor any cardiovascular events. So if you have simple fatty liver, there is no harm which is done to the patient. However, NASH is associated with cardiovascular events, and overall survival is less if you have NASH developing after transplant. So let's look at this meta-analysis, a very nice meta-analysis published in Transplantation in 2019. They also showed that steatosis is not associated with poor post-liver transplant survival. And look at the fibrosis development after transplant in patients who have metabolic syndrome. If you have recurrent NASH, fibrosis develops in around 5 to 11% of patients. One study showed around 25% at 5 years. But in patients who have de novo NASH, only 2 to 10% of patients tend to develop advanced fibrosis. So suggesting that recurrent NASH is more risky, more dangerous, and tend to progress over a period of time. And the most important predictors of fibrosis in this meta-analysis were presence of obesity and dyslipidemias. Immunosuppression does not fare here. So that means using of immunosuppression does not lead to metabolic syndrome and its complications as such. So overall, the data suggests that non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is common after liver transplantation, uncommon cause of liver-related mortality or graft loss, and 5-year survival is excellent considering the low rates of NASH with progressive fibrosis. So progression to cirrhosis over a period of 5 years is quite less, and hence you can say that you have excellent survival if you transplant patients with NASH or metabolic syndrome, and even if you use immunosuppression in whatever way you want to use. So how do you manage post-transplant non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? Obviously, lifestyle modification is very important. We've been talking about weight loss, calorie restriction, exercise, and there is a role of coffee in prevention of development of fatty liver disease. You have to take care of comorbidities, hypertension, control of diabetes, dyslipidemia. People have also suggested bariatric surgery in selected patients where there is morbid obesity. And obviously, you need a multidisciplinary effort for this. You need to have physicians, endocrinologists, cardiologists to take care of all these complications. And we need to have tailored immunosuppression, as Dr. Ella spoke about this earlier today, that we need to quickly take off steroids, decrease CNI use, and may consider favoring everolimus, as everybody has suggested in the previous talks. So how do you manage post-transplant metabolic syndrome? How do you play with immunosuppression? Obviously, you need to reduce the CNIs and add mycophenolate mofetil, as Dr. Manav also suggested that they tend to switch over to mycophenolate if you have post-transplant metabolic syndrome. and conversion of cyclosporine to tacrolimus if you have dyslipidemia as a major problem, because cyclosporine has little less side effect of dyslipidemia as compared to tacrolimus. The aim of diabetes control is to bring down the HbA1c to less than 7 by lifestyle changes and medications, preferably insulin or the use of metformin. And steroids should be avoided, or early taper of steroids should be considered, and switching from tacrolimus to cyclosporine if there is a poor glycemic control. For hypertension, you need to control the blood pressure and minimize the use of steroids and calcineurin inhibitors. So to summarize, recurrent and de novo NASH is common after liver transplantation. Immunosuppression may increase the frequency of hyperlipidemia, diabetes, and hypertension, and increase the risk of prevalence of metabolic syndrome. Corticosteroids are associated with increased rates of diabetes, hypertension, and hyperlipidemia in short term. However, long-term use is not being there for corticosteroids now, and hence these complications can be avoided. CNI and mTOR inhibitors also affect many parameters of metabolic syndrome to various degrees and contribute to long-term morbidity and transplantation. Hence, we should try and curtail the use of CNIs and cut down the doses and bring down to the minimum dose which is required to maintain good graft function. So before I conclude, let me just show you the research gaps which are there. We need to have elucidation of the natural history of recurrent and de novo NASH. Whatever data is available is short term, and maximum data which is available is only up to 5 years. We need to have preventive and management strategies for the control of metabolic comorbidities, especially the pharmacotherapy for recurrent and de novo NASH. There is no established pharmacotherapy right now, and optimization of immunosuppression protocols, a tailored immunosuppression as suggested by Professor Ed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manav, for an excellent talk. I'm sure we have a lot of questions, although we are running late. So,
I think, Sunil, that was a very good talk, very well summarized. I just wanted to make one point here. In fact, we had, like designed one NFLD guided INSL guidance document in which, you're probably also part of it. And I was supposed to be the captain of the so-called, post-liver transplant NAFLD stroke NASH, and try to generate guidelines for recurrent and de novo NASH. And we had a team, Dr. Manav and Dr. Neeraj, and we all were there. So I wish we are able to bring that out, because that's more towards our own patients in Indian perspective. And I think such efforts are really useful. And like you spoke today, brilliant, very good talk. And I think with Dr. S.P. Singh also being guiding, I think this post-transplant part of NASH is still unexplored. We still don't have any medications for post-liver transplant NASH. All the newer drugs are there, but I don't think there's any structured trial. And I'll be really, because I see in my OPD practice, patients coming up with, putting on weight, grade 2, grade 3 fatty liver on follow-up, some do biopsy and they have F2, F3. I mean, we're not sure we should use, the newer drugs, OCA and all. So I think that's something unexplored, and you have rightly pointed out the issues. Maybe comment from, Professor Mahmood, Professor Singh and others would be very useful.
Sunil, from your talk, it appeared that you are soft towards people with metabolic syndrome. Unlike patients who have alcoholic liver disease and who have transplantation, you are very strict with them. You must stop taking alcohol and all those things. Don't you think that similarly you should be tough with people who are obese, overweight, and who have NASH-related cirrhosis for whom transplant is done, and subsequently, if they again go back to their old ways?
So I think I completely agree with you, sir. The issue is that most of the complications which tend to develop after transplant is one obviously related to immunosuppression. Post-transplant metabolic syndrome is going to happen. So tailored immunosuppression is now being used in most of the patients. So what we are trying to taper is we quickly taper the steroids. We try to bring down tacrolimus to a minimum dose. As Dr. Manav said, after 1 year, we tend to bring it to just one drug. So that is what is being done. Lifestyle modification is required for transplant patients, non-transplant patients, or everybody, I would say. There is no focus on preventing medicine in India at all. 50% of our people in India are having fatty liver disease, but there is no focus on prevention of fatty liver disease. So obviously, when these patients will go on to develop cirrhosis or decompensation and subsequently transplanted, their lifestyle is not going to change. So I think I completely agree that this should be the focus. But still now, preventive medicine has not evolved to an extent in India where we can take care of these complications.
Can you take some blame for that?
I think, sir, physicians are obviously there to blame for that, sir. So the kind of approach we have in our OPDs is giving pills to the patient. Okay, so this is because of whatever we have. We have so many patients, we have a kind of rush where we have to completely finish our OPDs. But then we need to have this preventive aspect, and these guidelines by the government, which has come up, the inclusion into this national program of NAFLD. I think this is going to help towards kind of lifestyle modification and bring down these complications.
Yeah, I lose a lot of my patients because I am tough with them regarding, lifestyle modification. I tell them, if you're not going to change your lifestyle, if you're not going to abide by what you should be doing, then you better don't come to me. You can change a physician who,
Sir, I think it is very difficult to lose weight and maintain that, sir. Even if you tell them, they would do it for 3 to 6 months, but subsequently maintaining that weight is very difficult, pre or post transplant, whatever you say. So control of obesity is one of the most important factors which leads to development.
I will only agree partly with you because see, it's a wholesome, management. When you are trying to manage alcoholism in a patient, alcohol disorder in a patient who has alcoholic liver disease, you focus not only on the patient, also on the family. But in patients who have metabolic syndrome, who have obesity and other, I don't think you focus much on the family. Because I mean, they also contribute. They contribute a lot. Are they, Shweta, you have to, is Shweta there? Any further questions?
Yes, sir, there is a comment and there is a question from Dr. Chawla for Sunil. Sunil, he says, good talk. And he's asking, is there a role of budesonide in the management of prevention of NASH? Can we use budesonide early after transplant?
Sir, I think steroids are not being used much in transplant now. And even if you look at the doses which were used earlier and intra-op or immediately post-op period, we have really tapered the use of steroids. So maybe, if you really look at the literature now, or if you look at the experience in India, steroid taper is seen in all centers by 6 months. So hardly people are using steroids beyond 6 months unless there is acute rejection episodes. So maybe you can use if really required in patients of autoimmune hepatitis. Otherwise, I don't think so there's any indication to use budesonide as such. Dr. Sehgal can add to this.
Yeah, I know. I agree with you, Sunil, that if there's a need to use steroids, which that's the autoimmune group where the low dose is continued. Otherwise, we would like to taper it off in 3 to 6 months time in most.
And won't steroids, Dr. Sehgal, anyways contribute to NASH?
Of course, yes. I think that if you are on long-term steroids, we know they put on weight, they have dyslipidemia, they have impaired glucose tolerance, no question about that. So I think that if there is no need, then one should, get away from steroids in these transplant patients.
I think Sunil has addressed that issue also very nicely in his talk.
Yeah.